Okay, welcome back to rockstar.com. We are presenting rockstarETL, and this is a continuation of our load job that we created. And what we did is we loaded up some sales data, invoices and invoice lines. What we can actually do here, as I mentioned, this is a partition table. So what we can do, a key part of working with our tables is to utilize the partitions. So what we can do is write a query to see what partitions do we currently have, how are they populated, so this is our invoice lines table, and we can see that we've got our data sitting in a particular partition, which happens to be yesterday's partition. And similarly for invoices, we've got 70,510 rows also in yesterday's partition. So this is a key part of working with your data in BigQuery in building a data warehouse, is utilizing these partitions, because what you'll find, the pattern that we recommend is that you ingest your data into a initial table such as this by ingestion date, and it just makes it a lot easier to work with the data going forward, because you can isolate your data by when it was ingested and process only that data for a particular ingestion date. So what we're going to do here is build a kind of a mock pipeline to demonstrate that fact, because it's a really good pattern. So what we could do here is we could write a query to see if a particular partition is populated or not. So we could use an exists Right, so we've got a select exists, and then we've got a select, let's rather do just a one. Select one from this partition where the partition is yesterday. If we run just that part, the highlighted part, we get a 1 result. And if we run the whole thing, we should get a true. There we go. Now, conversely, if we run this for today's partition, which we know is empty, and we run just that, we should get no result. The query returned no results. And similarly, if we run the full query, the select exists, we should get it false. All right, so we can use this in our pipeline. So let's add a job step, and let's do a conditional SQL. So I'm going to notify myself again, and we're going to call this this pipeline, we'll say it is, we'll call it test partition. or we could say check partition. Put our project ID, location, job name, we will say exists query, and then we have our SQL statement, the path to the file in cloud storage containing the BigQuery SQL statement. Key thing is here, it must return only true or false. All right, so we've got our query here, and what we're effectively doing is we're building a test to see, is our current partition populated or not? And based on that result, we will perform the next job in the pipeline. So in this case, we need to actually invert our answer because we want to only proceed if the answer is true. So if we run this, the answer is true. Because we put it a not, we are changing the Boolean around. So the key thing is that this conditional SQL must evaluate to true in order to move on to the next step. So that's why we're saying, is there any data in today's partition? Only if we return a true will we move on to the next step. So what we need to do is take our query like so, save it, and what we're going to do here is call this partition check query, and you can leave this as a .txt or even as a .sql. And now we can refer to what we want to do is refer to this SQL statement, but in order to do that, we have to save it in cloud storage. So what we're going to do is find our bucket, and find our WWR queries, and then copy our partition check query from our local development environment into our WWR queries subfolder in storage. Alright, so we've uploaded our data, our partition check query, into storage. So a nice little trick is to select the file and then you can just copy everything like so. Our bucket, our folder, and our object. Copy that and we just paste it in like so. And we can choose a time, and we'll initially leave it as disabled at 0. So what we have here, let's save that. So in our check partition pipeline, which is over here, which we specified over here, just something to note, if you do want to change the name of your pipeline, it's as simple as renaming it over here, clicking save, and now our partition is called check. Similarly, if we wanted this step to be part of our load partition over here, all we have to do is change it to load and save it. And now it's in our load pipeline in the same step, because that's what we had it as in the other pipeline. If you do want to change the step number, all you need to do is select it. So we can select our job and click on move up or move down. In this case, we want to move it, for example, to step 2. So we click on move down, and if you don't see a change, just refresh your page, and there we go. It's in step 2. Another way is simply to go back into the job and change the step number here, change it back to step 1, and it's back in step 1 here. But in our case, it's in step 2, and we're going to move it back to its own pipeline out of the load pipeline. So we can select it and call it back check partition, and we'll put it as step 1. In fact, let's leave it as step 2, save it, and now there's our load that we've just come out of. Here's our new check partition, and it's step 2. And we can simply now select it and move it up, and just refresh the page, and it's step 1. And there we go. So what we have here is a step that it's a conditional SQL, which means it must return true or false, and only if it returns true will it move on to any subsequent steps. So right now, this, in order to be useful, we need a subsequent step in this pipeline to execute only if this is true. So what we could do is we could in fact move this to the load pipeline, keep it as step 1, and then change our load job to step 2. So now what will happen is this load job will only run if this evaluates to true. So it will only load today's partition if our current partition is empty. So this is querying today's partition, returns a true, so it will move on to the next step. Right, so if we were to change this and query yesterday's partition, which we know has data, like so, this should return a false. So if we run that, so yesterday's partition, which we know has data, returns false. So if this was our query, if this was our conditional query, this would not move on and load. So we're going to leave it as today's partition, because when you run a load job, it will only by default load in by ingestion date. The way we've set up these tables is that because it's partitioned by partition time, if we don't specify the actual partition in a query, then by default it will only populate into the current partition by ingestion time. If we were to run this pipeline, it will load the data into today's partition, which is the 27th. So that was yesterday's, and the 27th will be today. So after running this pipeline, we will expect to have 2 rows here, one showing data for today's partition and one for yesterday. So let's run this pipeline. Okay, so let's check our stack driver logging. And we can see starting run of step 1, Re-looping through. See, what the system does is it will not rerun a job that should not run. I.e., if you say run 96 times a day, i.e. every 15 minutes, rockstarETL will not run your job within that 15-minute window again if it is just run. So it's a precautionary check here to make sure that we don't accidentally run things twice in a specified time window. So you can see this is our query that we wrote. Select not exists, select one from invoices where partition date is today. Submitted successfully to the REST API service in Google Cloud. Okay, no issues. Job is running, sleeping for 30 seconds. It's got to give it a chance to actually run, and then it rechecks success. All good. So the conditional query result is true. Remember this, your query should only return true or false, otherwise it's not going to work. And then it does its check and it says finish step 1, starting run of step 2. So there was our step 1, now it starts step 2, our loading. And it's checking, doesn't need to rerun. The job isn't found within the time window we're talking about, so it is authorized to run the job. Here's the actual schema, details, and it's going to do invoices first. It submits it to the REST API service. Response is 200, okay. Final status is success. And then it does our invoice lines, submits it. Everything okay. Final status is success. And then finally it's finished step 2. Completed the pipeline. So it's completed pipeline load for this project. And our unique identifier, UUID, and then finally all pipelines completed, UBR Rockstar. So there we go. We can now disable our pipeline from running again by choosing 0 times number of runs per day and saving it. And with our pipeline, I received my ETL notifications. So here's my success email for my conditional SQL job type, which was step 1 of our pipeline load. Status of success. It's our job ID. Again, we can take our job ID, go into our REST API Explorer, loading API Explorer, can choose our project, our job ID, remove the beginning apostrophe, choose our location, execute, and we can see status 200, okay, all the details of the query that was run, all of the execution details, and no errors, state is done. Similarly, we've got our unique identifier and stack driver logging. This 3AC FA65E. So this corresponds to the UUID. So 3AC FA65E. So our email is drawing our attention to the fact that the UUID The unique identifier here is a way of unequivocally identifying our run in our logs, because we could even search using that UUID. And now this will bring back only Stackdriver log entries that pertain to our pipeline. And then we have, for our load jobs, we have our running for our invoice lines and invoices, and our success emails for invoice lines and invoices. So we received all of our notifications. If you don't want to receive a notification, it's for a particular step, it's as simple as removing the email address, and you will not be notified in that case. Again, in order to receive notifications, you would have to have your SendGrid details, have to be signed up with SendGrid, and have your details loaded into the SendGrid email settings part of over here. So you can see rockstarETL notifies us via email of the completion of our steps, and we also have complete visibility in Stackdriver logging of everything that's going on. That is important for any troubleshooting and to highlight any issues or areas that need attention while you are developing your pipeline. So what we had happen here is a conditional SQL, which is a condition had to be met of returning a true, and that condition was that there was no data in today's partition. If that was met, then load in our data in today's partition. So what this should look like then is if we run our partition check here for the table, we're going to expect to see two partitions, one for the 26th and one for the 27th, with the same number of rows in it. So let's run that. And there we go. We've got today's partition and yesterday's partition with our rows loaded. And similarly, we should see in invoice lines a similar situation. Right, so that is our conditional SQL job type, and it's very powerful for delaying subsequent steps from running until a condition is met. Because what you perhaps don't want to do is potentially load in data into, for example, today's partition, if there is still data in there that has that is needing to be processed and hasn't been cleared out. And you can use your imagination to use this conditional SQL job type to also manage partitions by, for example, once you have finished processing your data for today's partition, you could choose to clear the partition out, for example. So what you could do is you could then have something like this that says if there is data in today's partition, which would return a true in this case. So there is data in today's partition, and your next step could be a statement to delete the data like that. So this would then clear out any data in today's partition. So that is how you use the conditional SQL. Any SQL statement that returns a true or false must return only true or false in order for this to work. If the statement returns false, then subsequent steps will not run until this condition is met. Alright, that's it for the conditional SQL job type.